Hello, folks, and welcome. I'm Hadar Susskind, President and CEO of New Jewish Narrative. I am very pleased today to be joined by two wonderful guests. Laura Rozen, who is a veteran foreign policy journalist, has written for many different things and currently writes the diplomatic newsletter at Substack and serves on the editorial board of Just Security. Laura, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And Joel Bernard, who is the managing director of the Daniel Abraham Center for Middle East Peace, formerly with ALMEP and a longtime partner of ours. Thank you both for being with us. So,
Always a pleasure.
um, earlier this week, we saw what was, if I'm being honest, a really awkward and painful press conference of President Trump standing up there and Prime Minister Netanyahu standing up there, introducing this new, they called it a deal, but I guess it's a deal between the two of them, but more accurately, it's a proposal, this new peace proposal, and going through the points and talking about the plans. We got some level of detail from the president. We got some level of detail, some of which I think was overlapping and some of which was frankly a little different from the prime minister. And then, of course, there's the actual written plan that has been shared out there in the world. I'll start off just on the sort of personal point saying, for me, if this works, and I define works by if this ends the war and ends the shooting right now, and hostages are able to be returned home, and aid is brought into the people of Gaza, and we end the immediate conflict, I will praise this up and down and left and right, and I will thank President Trump and anybody else responsible for doing this. I think there's a lot in here that we're going to dig into that is very different than previous things we've seen in some ways that are good, in some ways that are challenging. So I have my questions and concerns about the big picture, but I certainly, I hope it moves forward and I hope it works. With that, I will stop my rambling and maybe Joel, let's go to you first to just, tell folks this is all new. Maybe people saw the infographic. I doubt many people have read through it in deep detail. Why don't you start sharing with us, what's really in this?
Sure. Hadar, it's lovely to be with you. Laura, always a pleasure, as always. And thank you for the platform. Before we get into it, I think it's very important to talk about where we are. The past 30 days have had, as I count, 11 major diplomatic events that all have culminated in what happened on Monday. So I'll give people a quick run through. August 27th, it's the first reported meeting where Jared Kushner and Tony Blair are at the White House. Okay. Jared hasn't been formally involved, and it was the first time that former Prime Minister Blair rocks up. He's clearly had been working with Jared on this day after plan for Gaza. Um, the Witkoff team, though trusted by President Trump, is not very large and doesn't have much capacity dealing with every conflict in the world. And even as they work towards um, ending the Hamas-Israel ceasefire, there's no capacity to build on what a day after plan was because, the Biden plans didn't go to phase two. So someone had to do that work. So it seems that Blair was doing that work. Reports coming out of that meeting is that Trump agreed with Blair and told him, go get the support of the Saudis and others. And so he went off. While he was doing that, on September 9th, the Israelis strike Hamas leadership in Doha and scramble the entire map. Okay. Um, Also, that leads to Bibi giving strange statements in his own country about that we will live as a super Sparta. If you remember that, the master of free economy, suddenly we're going to a managed, self-sufficient, autocracy economy and everything else. And really, we're in an escalatory cycle where Bibi is willing to throw everything on the bonfire. And the French-Saudi initiative to recognize a Palestinian state starts building up, and we start hearing that how much of the West Bank is going to be annexed. The floor being the Jordan Valley, and the ceiling being 83% of the West Bank, according to Bezalel Smotrich. September 21st, UK, Canada, and Australia recognize a Palestinian state. September 22nd, before UNGA, the UN General Assembly, you have the French-Saudi conference where other countries commit to recognizing a Palestinian state and really set the agenda for this year's General Assembly being about recognition of a Palestinian state. On the 23rd, the day after, Trump meets with all the Arab leaders to talk about the conflict, and President Erdogan of Turkey is basically co-chairing the meeting. At least it looks image-wise, sitting next to President Trump. And President Trump says at that meeting that he will not allow any annexation, and then goes on and says it in the Oval Office, and then tweets it from his own Response 47, being very clear. This is all before Prime Minister Netanyahu has landed. after Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Um, the next day, he meets with the Turks and they get a civil nuclear agreement. They get agreements to buy F-16s and clearly are also continuing to talk about Gaza. That evening, the Thursday night, Kushner and Witkoff go and meet Bibi in his hotel, where he's dealing with the fact that Trump has already publicly ruled out any West Bank annexation in response to what's gone on at the UN. So already strange things afoot. Bibi makes his speech on Friday at the UN, if you listen to it, where he says that if Hamas gives up the hostages, they can live, which is an important part of the deal. And also, goes on and says, no one in Israel agrees with the Palestinian state, but did not threaten to annex also in the speech, which is important. Over the weekend, clearly there are things that are going on, and the 21 points that apparently President Trump had agreed with the Arab states gets published. And then the next day, Bibi and Trump have this press conference, and now 20 points get published. So there are some edits between. And then Bibi apologizes to the state of Qatar. The 21st point that was deleted was about Qatar, so the apology really replaces it. And then today, we find out there's an executive order that basically President Trump gives a NATO type guarantee to Qatar, saying that if they're attacked, I will basically military respond. Technically, that should be a Senate agreement, but he doesn't care, so he'll just do it. So where are we up to? What this agreement is, and I'll pass over to Laura afterwards, is it's melding a day after plan that Blair had with a war-ending maneuver, adding in some of this UN two-state conference stuff, ensuring the Israelis can't punish the Palestinians in response, and pushing it all into a package. The Israelis got to edit parts of the package, but only the parts about Israeli security. They did not get to take out Palestinian statehood. They did not get to take out the fact that Gazans are now encouraged to stay rather than to leave. And there's a lot of pieces in there that, as we break it down, it's interesting. Um, as Hadar said at the top, the proof will be if the parties agree and then it is followed through. But if it is followed through, we go from a situation where 2.5 weeks ago, the Israeli government was talking about expelling Gazans and foreclosing a political horizon forever to the launch of a new political process between Israel and the Palestinians, with the political horizon being post-reform, some version of a Palestinian state. You want to talk about whiplash? That's what whiplash looks like. And despite all the other pieces of people saying it's never going to happen, whatever, that's what the text says. And that's post October 7th. And that's with this Trump administration. So all skepticism, all the challenges, all the other pieces, all the challenges about international justice, human rights, and accountability, notwithstanding, this has been a whirlwind of a month, and unpicking it is very complicated. And this 20 points is not a formal treaty, it's a slapdash agreement, but it is a bridge from a ceasefire agreement to a day after to a political process. And for whatever its flaws or its strengths, you've got to give credit to at least an attempt to link all three of those rather than dividing them up, at least as a starting point.
Thank you, Joel. That explains why I have a headache and feel dizzy. Um, and look, I mean, we're going to dig into these provisions, and Laura will start us off in a minute with some thoughts also. But I mean, I agree with you. It is, again, I have a lot of questions. I think there are a lot of concerns in this proposal, but it also has opportunity in it. And, hopefully we can move forward as a starting point with the positives of that. But Laura, let's hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Joel, I need you to do a timeline for me like every day, because every day I feel like I've, some new event happens, not just on the Middle East, but something else, and everything else I was thinking about and working on gets overtaken by events. And you're just how you set it out, help me frame it and think of it differently. I reread the plan today. One thing, let me note, so the Qatar, the deal that Joel mentioned, the White House gave to Qatar today, the almost NATO type deal, is on the White House press site, the White House website, and I printed it out. And I was looking to print out the Trump, it's called the Comprehensive Plan to End the Gaza Conflict, and it's not on the White House website that I could find. It was published as a White House tweet, so I thought that was interesting. And as Hadar, you said, it's a proposal. So I think that as Witkoff and others have said, they understand that this isn't the final thing, that there's still some details they need to work on. And that might be why it's not on the website yet. Of the 20 points, a couple things that jumped out at me. So point 16, this is the one that I fear will make it hard for Hamas to say yes, because like you both, I would really like Hamas to say yes, for the hostages to get out, for there to be an immediate ceasefire. And even if this is not the perfect proposal for a long-term arrangement, it would be a lot better than the current situation. The point 16 that I think may be problematic for getting Hamas to yes is very vague about when the Israeli Defense Forces would withdraw. It says that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza, but then it says that basically the Israeli Defense Forces will turn over, practically the IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to this ISF, this international security force that doesn't yet exist, according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority. Until they are withdrawn completely from Gaza, save for a security perimeter presence that will remain until Gaza is properly secure. So as we all have lived through, back in March, back in January, and several times during the Biden administration, you'd get these temporary ceasefires that were supposed to have a phase 2, and phase 2 would never happen because the Israelis would basically not want to do it, was my impression. And I worry that this is the kind of seemingly Israeli edited vagueness that will make it hard for Hamas to agree that Israel won't occupy it, right? Or it won't be a kind of long-term occupation.
Laura, so I think on 16, what's interesting is when you look at the 21 that was published pre the Israeli edits, it's had on the Arab sides will progressively hand over Gaza territory. I think what the Israelis added in is they're trying to model it after the Lebanon model, where as there's more demilitarization, we hand over more territory. So we're not it's not hope is not a strategy. So the commitment at the front of that piece that they will not annex or occupy is very important. Now, do they get to set the red line and then say if the red line has been met, or are there objective observers who get to say it's done? When we look at the Lebanon model, the US has played that, and there has been some withdrawals and and it's not as fast as people want and people are frustrated. 16, I think, is not an impediment if in Hamas's responses, they limit their responses to timetables, expectations, and it seems like the White House has been open to that, if that's where the amendments are like. But I also, if you wrote an entire thing about what the actual stages would look like under 50 pages, I don't think we'd ever get to the rest of it because they just argue about point number 16 within a 50-point plan.
Right. Great points. And then I guess one of the Arab diplomat told me that they were frustrated that I guess no annexation of the West Bank was taken out of the what was originally the 21-point plan. Do you know where that was in the
I don't believe it was ever in there. I think President Trump's public declaration that there will be no annexation of the West Bank, and the fact that Bibi didn't push back on him in his public press conference means that it's not there.
I don't think it was in any draft. It was not in any draft that I saw.
I know that
okay.
I didn't see any draft. What I think there was a frustration was that there's no unity of the West Bank and Gaza within the draft. However, when you look at points 19 and 20, it's functionally there. Like it's not there in particularity, but it's functionally there when it speaks about a political process and the aspirations of the Palestinian people. It exists. But I think that the Trump administration is aware that the Prime Minister of Israel has to agree to this. And if you make him force it in writing, it's just he's already said he doesn't have a green light. So he can upset the president if he wants, but he's not going to have US backing for annexation. So if he goes forward without the US backing, well, that's on him.
Yeah.
One other point I will just say, and I on the humanitarian aid, and I was at the State Department yesterday, and you will note that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not mentioned here. It talks about using the United Nations. So I guess on the Israeli side, you wouldn't be worried about Hamas aid diversion so much, which was their reason for having Gaza Humanitarian Foundation instead of the UN doing the aid, under the other points of this agreement where Hamas would disarm and et cetera, et cetera. But it is interesting that the Trump side seems to accept that it's not been a success.
Yeah. It is interesting. Laura, I'm curious maybe to hear some more about conversations you've had with Arab diplomats, because to me, one of the biggest questions in this, and you guys just touched on it a little bit, is who are the arbitrators of whether these different things have been achieved? What does de-radicalization mean, for example? I mean, there's a little bit of detail in there of certain things that need to happen, but there are a lot of questions that say, XYZ needs to happen, whether that's de-radicalization or disarmament or other steps. And who is it who is going to decide when these goals have been achieved? And as we get into the Board of Peace with its chairman, uh, President Trump, and again, whoever those other members, other international leaders are going to be, what's their role in governance versus what's the role if for any actual Palestinians in governance, and when are, what's that power balance going to be? When are these decisions going to be made? I've certainly heard from a number of people who, just look at this and say, well, Palestinians have been completely sidelined in this, and the role is that this Board of Peace is now going to be, rule over the city-state of Gaza and do whatever they want there. Now, that's not what it says, but there are people who I think who feel that way. But I'd be curious from both of you, really.
Well, yeah. And Joel, let me ask both of you, do you know like who is thinking of providing troops, I guess, for this international stabilization force? And do you have any sense of how long or not that would take to materialize?
Indonesia has already pledged 20,000 troops publicly.
Wow.
So they said that, Unga. Who else? This is an educated guess. If you've noticed, the president keeps talking about the Grand Field Marshal of Pakistan quite a lot, and the Pakistanis keep commenting on this. So if I was a betting man, I would say that the Pakistanis are somewhat involved, and none of this is going to work without Egypt. So there's going to be some Egyptian-led forces. There have to be, just given the proximity. So
That's fascinating.
I would assume that if I had to make bets, that's where those would come from. I can't imagine, who else? I don't see Israel allowing Turkey to put people there. I don't know if they
Mhm.
put people there. I don't think they want NATO troops there, so I don't really see that one going. But I think
They're
that
going to be thrilled with Pakistani troops. It's a
well,
strange world we live in.
it is. If there's a PA invite that enables it, I think that there would also be a desire of a UN Security Council resolution if there's an interim security force, though. This is going to be a multilateral agreement rather like a by like a I don't think this is going to be a UN agreement. I think this is going to be an agreement that then goes to the UN, right? I don't think this is going to be
Right.
type sort of that modality way around. Hadar, to your point about who decides, it's an important point. Do not underestimate the fact that President President Erdogan, Crown Prince uh, Mohammed bin Salman, these people are deeply involved in this, right? The Emir of Qatar, like this will go as far as these people continue to put their bilateral relations to the US that the Palestinians matter. If that happens, this is the first time I would argue since Camp David in 2000, where the region is united behind the Palestinian cause. And when I say the region, I'm not just talking about the Sunnis, also like Turkey, Qatar, others. Even skeptics of the PA like the UAE are behind this, right? So if they continue to all push and they create this united front, that's really the strike in Doha created a united front amongst all of them. If that united front, sans Iran, right, is continuing to put pressure on what they think is a reasonable expectation that the US is there, I think it to be reasonable. And for all of the extreme skepticism that I can tell and share about having Donald J. Trump share a board of peace, this is kind of like the Ukrainian situation where he's like, look, I might personally be enriched, whatever it might be, but the best protection against Russia is if they bomb you, they're bombing me. And the same is true here. Okay, especially when combined with point 12, where it's an encouragement for Gazans to stay rather than to leave. Okay, so it's not just that they can come and go, but encouraging them to stay. The best protection against Israeli malfeasance in Gaza is that they'd be hurting the Board of Peace run by President Trump. And according to that point that it's written in 16, it starts with, right, that it will be run by a series of technocrats that will be supervised by a Board of Peace. So what does this practically mean if you read it and you assume the text is correct? Do the laws of the PA I'm not talking about, I'm just talking like the practical, like garbage pickup, taxation, this sort, like the day-to-day stuff. Are we importing that into Gaza? Okay, I know the Israelis don't care about that. They care about education, incitement, prisoner payments. All right, so put those to a side and assume those are on the reform agenda, right? But the day-to-day stuff, are we importing that from the West Bank? And that, the banking system, everything else, and that's building up? Or is there a whole new set of laws coming from here that then be imported to the West Bank? It's very technical and boring, but that's what really matters. Because if it's A, then that's prepping the ground for the PA to take over once education, incitement, prisoner payments, and security matter, then they'll take over. And then the technocrats are doing all the work and whatever else, and making sure that no one's diverting the money in whatever way and what needs to be. If it's B, then that's a different situation. Now, I don't know which way it's going to go, but I would assume that they're going to import Palestinian standards that are up to standard into Gaza in terms of like who's the health ministry, okay? Like what's the vaccine standards? What are all these sort of laws? And I would assume that the PA's requirement to do this invitation is that, if the text says eventually it's being handed over to the PA, let's not have two different legal systems. If you want us to reform the education system until we can put our educators in that, okay, we can talk about that. And on the de-radicalization point, on point 18, it's a fascinating point in this document. Okay, so it calls for like an interfaith dialogue. From speaking to people who've been involved, it's not really about interfaith dialogue. It's not about rabbis and imams speaking. It is a recognition, which as someone, as you mentioned, who worked for ULMEP and civil society, I am so thankful is in there, that just looking at this from a secular point of view is not going to work. Okay, Israel is a very religious society. The Palestinians, especially Gaza, is a very religious society. Understanding the sources of authority that are religiously there. And by the way, even though the Israelis, it seems, edited out de-radicalizing both populations, this appeals to both Israelis and Palestinians. Okay, so in both societies, appealing to the religious elements to try
Appeals
and
to, but not applies to.
yeah, but in terms of the importance of both of them being able to be worked with is vital. And by the way, in a moment where we're attacking civil society domestically and worldwide, having this in there, along with the Republican House having MEPA funding, the Lowy Partnership for Peace funding for 50 million, is not nothing. And is actually an indication that funding civil society towards peace is something that is now part of the peace plan that President Trump has put forward, is for me a net positive.
Can I
Laura,
ask either of you, do you think in Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's heart, is he hoping that Hamas says no? Is he hoping that they say yes? What is your sense of that? I know I don't mean to be too cynical. I actually don't mean to be cynical because I don't.
I don't think that's cynical. I think, look, point 17 says everything above 17 and above applies even if Hamas says no, right? So he wants this to be, what he's saying is, look, the places that we clear from Hamas, let's say Hamas says no, and we've cleared northern Gaza from Hamas. We want the international security force. We want all these other things. We don't want Gazans. And in return for having the internationals come in, we're not going to force Gazans out. We're not going to annex Gaza. We're not going to annex the West Bank, whatever. So then the question is, well, what is under point 17? So if it, because 17 says, in the event Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above, including the scaled up aid operation, will proceed in terror-free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. So that's not dependent on Hamas. So what is dependent on Hamas? Let's look down. Point 18, this interfaith process I just spoke about. Point 19, while Gaza redevelopment advances and when the PA reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway for Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. And 20, the US will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peace and coexistence. So it would appear to me, okay, that the future of Gaza independent is not dependent on Hamas. The future of the Palestinian political project is, right? If they don't agree, then the linkage between the day after and a political
I see.
that's how I read it. Now
I-
that could be a mistake of the text, but that's how I read it.
now I think I think that's fundamentally correct. Laura, I think it's an interesting question because one of the things that was sort of fascinating for me, right? We watched President Trump up there talk, whatever it was he was doing there for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, while Netanyahu sort of stood and
I counted, it was 27 minutes before he let Netanyahu say a single word.
yeah, and it was, I mean, admittedly, I did think it was funny every time they showed Netanyahu, who was obviously like standing there frustrated. But then Netanyahu got to speak and he said his things. But then Netanyahu did a press conference afterward in Hebrew. And, as always with him, and to be fair, he's not alone in this, what he said in Hebrew was not the same things he said in English. And it was I don't think there was anything that was, binary, yes, no, different, but it was a much harder tone. It was we're not withdrawing, we're not this, there will never be a Palestinian state. I'm paraphrasing but
Right.
it was much stronger. So again, I have no
Do you think his audience was Israelis, his coalition, or was it Hamas to say?
Oh, I think that was for his coalition. I think that was
Okay.
domestic for his domestic political purposes. But I mean, again, I have no idea what is in his heart of hearts, if we assume such a thing. But to Joel's point, I think he would be, if not happy, at least willing to do those, those top 17 and try to bring this immediate conflict to a close. I mean, both in that press conference and every other time in English and in Hebrew, he has said there will be no Palestinian state. So the pretense that he's interested in creating a diplomatic horizon for Palestinian independence and sovereignty, I don't believe is true.
I would say in his heart of hearts, he probably wants Hamas to say yes, and I'll tell you why. He doesn't believe that the Palestinians are ever going to reform. Okay. But if this enables him not to foreclose the horizon because Trump forced him not to, you can move forward with regional integration, which is where he wants to go,
I
right?
see.
And if Hamas says no, and you don't have the last three, you can't really move forward with regional integration either, right? So I don't think it's in anyone's incentives because then, like, everyone's exhausted, right? Like the Israeli reservists are exhausted. I know Hadar, like that's a personal, fact. Like everyone's tired, right? No one wants this to continue. We're coming up to the second year of the war, right? It would be easier for everyone if it's over. And look, he's saying no Palestinian state, but he's been saying that post Oslo, right? Like this isn't new for Netanyahu. Like even if you listen to the Bar Ilan 2 speech, right? What kind of state? Andorra, right? Like but I really Ramallah has shifted radically from where it was on Trump one. Even if President Abbas is the same person, the people around have shifted. Hussein's now vice president. Their ability to work with Abraham Accord countries, their rebuilding of their relationship with the UAE, their rebuilding of a relationship with Riyadh. Like it's a different situation in their openness to different things. So in some ways that's easier for Israel. In some ways it's not. I think the biggest question has been, is all the pressure on the PA to collapse them or to reform them? And until this document, I would argue that at least post October 7th, it was to collapse them. Right? You listen to Smotrich, there's nothing they can do. Our aim is to foreclose this and be done with it. Annex, done, no more. No more Palestinian state. We've moved beyond Oslo. Despite October 7th, despite this being President Trump, it's still open. And it's not just me saying this. Amit Segel, who's probably the journalist closest to Prime Minister Netanyahu, basically said the biggest fear of this is that a different prime minister and a different president can come together and said, if even Netanyahu and Trump still allowed there to be a Palestinian state, then we're gonna, we're not gonna be more Catholic than the Pope. It's a political precedent that I think is very important. And it's not everything that everyone wants. And it's definitely, I'm not sitting here selling you something. And for those who truly believe in international humanitarian, international justice and ICC and human rights and accountability as your preferred version of justice, this is a moral atrocity. But there's always a tension between peace building and
Right. Yes.
justice,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
like conflicts, in my view, don't end in courtrooms. That doesn't make it any less morally horrendous.
Right.
Russia, Ukraine. I don't think Putin's ending up in the ICC, people. I just don't see it's going to happen, right?
Right.
This isn't unique to this conflict. And so that's very hard and that's very emotionally. And also, like, we're going back into a process. But the last thing I'll say, Hadar, is something you said before. For the Palestinians, the fact that the region's behind them and that Trump's looking at a multinational process with this board of peace detaches normally the negotiations from a purely US-led thing to maybe something that's more multilateral, which is what they've been looking for. And Abbas has banked 9 new recognitions, including 2 UN Security Permanent Council members, with no consequence as of today. That's not nothing, right? So I know Bibi's doing his victory speeches. Abbas basically banked his victory speech early, right? Like in terms of what he got in terms of at the UN security at the UN conferences. So you've got to look at victory speeches in terms of timing and what people are speaking to their bases. But again, the text is the text. And Laura, the point you made about it not being published on the website yet, I think is critical. From some of the leaks that have happened yesterday and the day before, it seems like Trump's not open to like the major parts of the deal. But when it comes to timetables of withdrawal, of disarmament, we can talk about that. And that's really important. Those details might not match on the big building blocks, but that's where the disagreement is. And if he's willing to allow that, there's a momentum that can make this move forward. And the last thing I'll say, the EO about Qatar isn't just about Qatar. If you're Hamas and you want to know that you're not going to be pursued and killed if you exile, how can you have international guarantees? Well, what could be stronger than President Trump basically giving a NATO type guarantee to Qatar? Because now, if you escape to Qatar, you're under a US aegis. Or, by the way, if you go to Turkey, you're under NATO aegis. So you now have two Western basically.
I was going to ask, I didn't know how amnesty would work, and the amnesty for Hamas people who agree to give up their arms and go into exile or whatever. Is that what you think?
Well, I think there's two pieces. There's
two different. You can either choose to exile, or you can say, I believe in coexistence, and give up your weapons. So you can sort of DDR yourself into the new technical space. Or if you don't want to do that, you can leave, right? If you leave, I think the question is, well, what makes sure that we don't
Right.
Well, there are two, if they're willing, I don't know if they're willing to accept them, but if Qatar and Turkey are willing to host them, there are two very willing countries that both have very strong protections to prevent Israeli reprisals against these people as long as they stay in those two countries. I mean, I don't know how you can have a stronger international guarantee. Now, that's not officially linked, but like I can't read that Qatar EO in any other way.
Right.
Laura, I know there were a couple provisions you were looking at as ones of particular interest. Was there different ones that you wanted to raise up and talk about a little bit?
No, I think you guys covered the ones that I was looking at.
So, let me ask another thing then, and for either one of you. Again, Joel, you touched on sort of the moral and, the justice. And I think there are a lot of people, and I'll include me on the list, right, that struggle with that. Even though I also think what you said is fundamentally true, that's, any conflict in history, you look at it, doesn't end with everybody kissing and making up and justice is served, right? It ends with it gets bad enough that each party finally comes to some sort of agreement that we're going to stop this. But in terms of trying to build ultimately, right, build out Gazan first and then Palestinian society and build shared society and coexistence, not necessarily in the same political entity, do we think, again, I mean, so much of this for me comes back to like what's actually going to be the Palestinian role versus the Board of Peace or Blair or others. But and I'm curious if you've heard from other diplomats, either of you, of others, whether people are going to be able to get past that line or not.
I think it all depends about implementation, right? Like, is there enough in there that you can squint and find a way forward? Yes, there is a tiny glowing light at the end of the tunnel that truly didn't exist for the past 2 years. Like, Biden could say and Blinken could say what they want, all they wanted. It didn't get anywhere, right? This actually has it. Now, is it actually possible? I don't know. It genuinely depends on implementation. Is there an implementing fashion that you could do that would force people's hands to the fire? Yes. Will they do it? It's very unlikely, but it's possible. And this is where I think it's very important. The right, and by the way, it's not just Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the majority of the Likud, okay? All right, 92 Knesset members basically said we won't have a Palestinian state enforced upon us, right? Even when you push that out, like there was a desire to say there has to be a formal closing of Oslo post October 7th. This prevented that. All caveats, Oslo didn't do what it was supposed to do and everything else, all the critiques. This also improves, in my view, on the Oslo process in that it multilateralizes this. This isn't just Israel and the P8. We now have a regional component. We've got the Saudis. We've got the Turks. There's a lot more there trying to push this in a certain direction. And for all of the challenges with the Trump administration, personalizing it for him is a guarantee for him in a way that is stronger than anything else that exists on this planet, right? Putting his name on something means that he owns it. And by the way, I don't think this expires when he stops being president. Like, I don't know what that means long term. I have no concept or clue. It didn't say President Donald J. Trump. It said Donald J. Trump. I don't know what that means, right?
Mm.
I've got no clue. I don't think anyone does. I think he's very busy for the next 3 years. I think that other people will be running this. Um, but again, I go back to the Ukraine model. The best protection against Russia is that you're kicking the crap out of someone who's the president of the United States who's invested in it. The best protection for Gazans against what they, see as like people who tried to wipe them out is that you're now being, you might not want President Trump as the chairman of your board of peace, but you're at least under his umbrella. Now, that might be deficient and everything else, but in the brutality of the world that we live in today, where international law has huge moral standing, but very little practical hard power standing, at least in terms of the ability to stop bullets while impunity exists, and you have a US administration who truly does not believe in international law and will sanction those who believe in it. This is a far better way to save people's lives in the immediate term than waiting for a change in US administration for 3 years.
Laura, you want to add?
I was just going to say, so I didn't know if you could give your sense of if the French-Saudi initiative at the UN on 2 states was helpful or unhelpful or not in this whole process, or irrelevant. And one thing I'll say, going to State Department press conferences and backgrounders and stuff, Rubio, when he went to Israel a couple of weeks ago, they basically said that any moves Israeli sort of looking like they might annex the West Bank, they were blaming it all on France for anyone who recognized Israel. Interestingly, recognized Palestine. Interestingly, they never blamed the Saudis.
Yes.
But so when France put out,
You're not allowed to say that.
What?
I said they're not allowed to say that.
But when people came out on Monday to say, countries, the French put out a statement saying, we welcome it, blah, 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 blah. And they basically said, commends the principles set out in the plan, which are in line with the New York Declaration adopted at the initiative of France and Saudi Arabia on the 12th of September. Anyhow, it's interesting. The French have been saying that in the run-up, that they thought what they were doing was compatible with what the Trump administration was trying to do.
It's interesting, and it goes to a couple. I'm going to take from pieces from a couple of the questions folks have asked, and I remind everyone, if you have questions, to use the Q&A function. When Trump spoke, he said, well, all these other people are on board. And I'll be honest, when I talked to people right afterward, I said, well, he said it. We haven't seen it yet, but we have now seen it.
Right.
Many, many nations, as Joel was talking about before, in the region, Arab and Muslim nations, other European nations, then the PA, many others have gotten on board. Although, again, if you look at the statement from the big bloc of Arab nations, similarly to the differences between what Trump said and what Netanyahu said, what they said they're supporting isn't exactly the same thing as what Trump said, and certainly isn't exactly the same thing as what Netanyahu said. And the real question, I think, is like, what does that Venn diagram ultimately look like, and how much of this can we get in the circle that everybody supports? Wait, Joel, just one more thing before you answer it, because the other question that I think comes with it is, who ultimately has the veto power over this? And who might try to exercise that power, and that could be, literally on a political level, but it also could be on a, the level of the extremists, whether we're talking Palestinian or Israeli or other. So I throw that whole clump of thoughts back at both of you.
So,
Joel,
go on, you go, Laura.
no, please.
All right. So, firstly, any agreement that's going to work has to have parallel victory speeches. Okay. Each side has to be able to claim victory. Okay. So people who are very uncomfortable with Prime Minister Netanyahu claiming victory, he was always going to try, right? That they are functionally far more powerful than the other party and feel like they could, if they wanted to, do whatever they want, right? It is only like the consequences of their actions with the US genuinely and potentially with the Abraham Accords that restrains them in any way. And so they've bumped up against those, right? And like the consequence of their own economy of like controlling that. On the French-Saudi initiative, I don't think it was planned this way, but I think that Kushner and Witkoff found a way to make it work, right? And yes, I think it's very apt that they will never attack Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. And I think that's fine. Like that's what that demonstrates to you they don't really care. Look, he was also next to Starmer twice when Starmer recognized the Palestinian state.
That's right.
And there was no consequence. So like the Trump administration does not care. Like what it is telling you is they will not use US credit to punish those recognizing a Palestinian state. And for Israel, that's a big deal because you can do what you want, but we're not going to do anything. We're not going to condition anything. We're not going to sanction them. We're not going to do anything else. So, you've lost that card, right? He needled Canada because President Trump loves needling Canada. It has nothing to do with the Palestinians. In terms of veto power, the Russians just came out supportive, by the way, after speaking to President Abbas. So again, the PA is becoming a very important, relevant thing. So, if this does go to a UN Security Council resolution, you've got 4 or 5. I can't see the Chinese vetoing this. It just doesn't seem like their issue. So I don't think there's any formal veto on that. I mean, of course, like if Hamas says no, then half the plan doesn't go forward, right? In terms of the Israeli cabinet decision, the only thing that needs to go to the Israeli cabinet is the hostage part of this deal. Because to release prisoners, you have to have a cabinet decision. The rest of it doesn't. This 20 points is not written like a treaty. Okay, it's not like Oslo where it was a treaty. Like it's slapdash together, right?
It's an infographic.
Okay, but like, all right, that's what it needed to be. If it does what it needs to be, I don't care. If it doesn't, then it's problematic, right? So
Agreed.
you don't need like a treaty or something that you can't vote on. But like, again, like, could you see a scenario where Bibi come, under a different administration or a different Israeli government says, well, we never voted on this in the Knesset? Yeah, and that I would say for the American administration is worried that the next one won't fulfill its commitments, you'd want this to be locked into a Knesset vote. I will say, given the high levels of dependency of Israel on the US, and this is a Trump plan, I can't see any Israeli premier getting out of what they've agreed to with President Trump. So in many ways, that's locked in. For Hamas, they need international guarantees. That's why the EO to Qatar, I think, is so important. Turkish involvement so important. Arab state involvement on the ISF, who they give their guns to, who's holding it. And I think that what we're seeing is that the Qataris and the Turks and others are telling them, we were in the room with the president. This isn't third part. Not we were there. We heard him. We are telling you, we know this is it. Is that enough for Hamas? I don't know, but I don't know what more. If they think that a UN Security Council resolution gives them a stronger thing than that, they don't understand President Trump, right? That he doesn't care about you. That's just not how his brain operates.
Right.
So, I don't think the far right has a veto on the hostage deal because there's a catch, in terms of if Ben-Gvir leaves, there's still enough votes given Saar being in the coalition. If Ben-Gvir and Smotrich go, there's enough votes if Gantz comes in to get the hostage deal or to go to the Knesset to at least get it through. And that's what you need the vote for. Israel's going to elections anyway this year. It's only as in the next 12 months. It's only a matter of when, January, April, or October. It's just about if the coalition
Scheduled for November 26th, in case anyone doesn't know, but
that's when it runs out. So like, I don't see the politics in Israel being the reason that this doesn't move forward. Ramallah's is agreeing. Hamas again is I think there's a challenge between Hamas local in Gaza and Hamas regional, and that's been a challenge throughout. But yeah, everyone else, and then of course the other spoiler is Iran, and I don't take it for nothing that Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who was the biggest Iranian-backed group out there, already came out with a no, and then quickly inversed themselves and said we need to speak to Hamas because I think that within Palestinian polity, being the Iranian force is not popular. Just genuinely, right? Being with Turkey, being with Qatar, whatever. But if you're only Iranian, it's not a good position for you within the Palestinian polity. You want to balance it. And so, I think one of the challenges that when you look at Qatar and Turkey and them and Egypt for that matter, trying to maneuver with the Hamas, they are trying to push them as much as possible, but they don't want to push them all the way into the hands of Tehran, right? And that's the push and pull that they've got in terms of how far can we genuinely push them? And when you speak to Turks or Qataris, they'll tell you Hamas are willing to agree to give up and do other things on the condition that this leads to Palestinian statehood in some way, right? And so that connectivity is very important for them. And them having to work with their political rivals in Ramallah is not easy, but this deadline is forcing a very unusual thing to happen within the Palestinian polity as well. So we'll see, but that's what I'd say on the veto mentality.
I saw the Iranians when they were in New York last week, and I actually don't think they want to be a spoiler. The plan wasn't out yet, but I think they don't want to be a spoiler on this, and they have enough problems with the Americans and the Israelis on other files right now than to put themselves in that position right now.
That's fascinating. Laura, I wonder if there's more either on the Iranians or the Turks or any of the other players that
I wish I knew. I
about
didn't
this.
see the Turks this time, but I'm curious, either of you, if you know how much pressure, inducements Turkey and Qatar, Egypt, anyone else can put on Hamas to force them to say yes. I mean, do you
I can speak a little bit to that.
please?
So like Egypt, of course, is the proximal power and have the relationships with Hamas on the ground because they're just there, right? Like, so, you know, Egypt can play a particularly strong role, but Hamas have been attacking Sisi recently, saying that he's not playing a strong enough role, and that's pissed off the Egyptians. Um, Hamas have three ideological allies who are Muslim Brotherhood. There's the Iranians, there is the Turks, and there are the Qataris. I mean, everyone on this webinar, I'm assuming if you're here, knows about the challenges that Doha's had with Hamas and with Israel and sort of the tripartite there. Um, the Turks are interesting. Turkey is extremely popular on the Palestinian street. AKP is a very good example of an Islamist government that has recognized the state of Israel. Okay. With all the challenges, everything they've done vis-a-vis the Israelis post October 7th is reversible. They haven't pulled out their embassy. They haven't ended their relations. They've ended their economic relations. So I think that's important. And AKP offers a really interesting DDR path forward that gives a modality that you can have an Islamist politics that can be stridently anti-occupation and yet still have a recognition of Israel. So I think that's a very interesting ideological place that you can land. It's also strong, proud, all the other things that you need to have. I will say that Turkish-Israeli relations, the real thing that's creating stress is Syria, but that's a different mission for a different podcast. In terms of that, but President Erdogan and President Trump are very close. You saw it in the White House like that, and they just
He's his favorite strongman. He said so.
Right.
So I'm saying like they've got a civil nuclear agreement. They've just signed. They're getting the F-16s. I mean, like the Israeli, and when Hamas sees that, right? Again, take this out of the context of Israel-US. When Hamas sees that Erdogan has this tight relationship, when Hamas sees that Qatar has this tight relationship with America, that should give them the confidence that if those leaders are telling them Trump's not lying to you, to us, look at our strong relationship, and we're conveying that to you, that should be enough. So to your point, Laura, it's pressurizing them through demonstration that we have a strong enough relationship with America and we've prioritized this enough that we've got you. And if you say no to us, we can't protect you anymore.
Right. So that's fascinating.
All this protections that we've done, all this stuff that we can't, we're out. Like if you've got some debates here or there about de-escalation timetables, okay. Fair. Like if you look at the parts the Israelis edited, and I know it seems really core. It's not that core. It is to the extent that it's when the withdrawal will happen, and these things are important because you're worried they're not. But it's not on 72 hours the hostages are released, 250 lifelong prisoners, 1,700 Gazans, all women and children. That is non-negotiable. Okay. And that's what Turkey, by the way, agreed to. And like if you want to say that they agreed to those 21 points, that's what they agreed to on lots of things. The question is the skepticism: will we get to a Palestinian state? Will we not? Which is vital and huge and big and everything.
Right.
Not on those small things. And on those bigger things, it requires PA reform, not just in intent, but in actual action. And Abbas has moved forward on prisoner payment reform. We've got to see if it goes all the way to the end and all these other things. But again,
the fact that Hamas agreed though to the plan with Trump and Biden basically last January, and then saw Witkoff basically and the US give Israel cover to not move to phase 2, does that hurt the credibility of the people?
I think that the bigger harm wasn't that. It was when they released Idan Alexander for the US,
right,
last US hostage, and they expected something to come and nothing came.
Uh-huh.
I think that was them doing a good gesture to the Americans and nothing came. I think that was the real challenge. I think the big difference right now is after the Israeli strike in Doha, you have unanimity of the Gulf. You no longer have the UAE having one position and Saudi having one position, and they're all in a unanimous voice, and that's different.
Okay.
And once you've got that unanimity there.
So I think it was that. I mean, that was a great question because as we look at why Hamas might do it or not. I mean,
Right.
also Joel, everything you were just talking about is like this fascinating mirror image of what we've had in American politics for so long of, the no daylight between the US and Israel, right? Like what you were just talking about is Hamas, hopefully, maybe, whatever, is going to be convinced because the US has a strong relationship with the Turks and the US has a strong relationship with the Qataris, right? Like we flipped this whole, this whole kind of concept that obviously didn't succeed on this front in those past years, but what was just the message from American politicians and Israelis of like, no daylight, we're absolutely together. These are the assurances. And now we're talking about assurances that the US is giving the Qataris and maybe Hamas leaders by extension, or the Turks, and giving them, giving them planes. And I think it goes also to your question, Laura, like of what, why would Hamas or Palestinians overall believe that this is going to move forward? And I think that's one set of answers. And the other fundamentally for me is that this is it's a 20-part deal or whatever, but it's functionally it's a 2-part deal. It's an end the war deal. And then hopefully it's this other stuff.
I actually would say it's a 3-part deal. It's not 2 parts. It's an end to the war. It's a day
Like
after.
a second round draft pick.
No, it's an end to the war, a day after, and then a political process. And the fact that that 3rd part even exists, and Laura, you asked where the Saudi-French part fits in. That's where it fits in.
Okay.
Find Witkoff with Trump with the Saudi-French initiative, and you packaged it all together, plus a Trump personal guarantee of no annexation in the West Bank, plus an EO to Qatar saying that you've got NATO protections. Plus an apology to Qatar to demonstrate that he can even get a proud Israeli prime minister to issue an apology. You add all of that up,
and he tweeted out the picture of Netanyahu reading.
You add all of that up, and you send it off, and you're like, you're not going to get better than this. And that's really the message. It's like,
can Jared get his father to stop bashing the French? There's the ambassador to France. Now, doesn't matter, but he's always bashing them on this
none
file.
of it matters. Like,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
But I think that's a really important point. All the normal things that matter, right? We've all been trained, or you're a phenomenal diplomat. All the normal things. You read Demarches, you read this. Like, none of it in Trump world matters. None of it.
Right. I know.
Personal relation, like when Witkoff speaks to the president, it matters. And what I said earlier, I think is the most critical part. The success of moving from ceasefire to day after to a political process requires the Turks, the Qataris, the Saudis, the UAE, all of them to constantly prioritize in their bilateral relationship that this also matters. It doesn't mean it subsumes it to just that, but this also matters. And if that happens, I think there is a pathway, because Trump by himself doesn't care about a Palestinian state. I think that's very clear, right? But if the whole region's united and saying, you can do it, Mr. President, and we're with you, and we're not insisting on like something that's absurd and unreasonable, but it can lead to normalization and regional integration, we can give you all of that, right? If you continue to push. Now, where's the reasonableness? Where's it going to go? And by the way, it's front-ended on PA reforms, not on Israeli withdrawal and settlement building, right? Again, fair, unfair. It is what it is now. So the whole Palestinian state enterprise is now dependent on the PA being able to reform. That's not an easy lift, but to be fair, the PA pledged that in the Saudi document. You asked what was in the Saudi-French document. Go back to the annex. There's like a 12-page annex about the reforms the PA's pledged to do in every sector. That was part of the cost. They had to promise they'd do them. This wasn't the US pushing. That was the Saudi and the French pushing. So that's what they've got. So you've got this whole set of reforms there.
So one other thing I want to go back to, because in some ways, it's a very big picture question, but it's quite specific. But, somebody asked in the Q&A here, this is fundamentally, Joel, you're talking about the phase 3, the path to Palestinian statehood, et cetera. The general understanding is that a 2-state solution has not been and is not the position of Hamas, right?
That's a good point.
This is aspirational to get to a 2-state solution. Is there some disconnect there? And again, my sort of answer to this goes back to the Hamas decision would be based on step 1, which is end the war, and that the other parts are broader than that. But what do you two want to add to that?
Do you want to go first, Laura, and then I'll give my conclusion?
Please, you go.
All right. Look, the Saudi-French initiative was a position against maximalism. Okay.
Mhm.
They were like, look, Hamas wants to destroy Israel. Okay. They don't want a two-state solution. This is not a victory for Hamas, what we're doing through recognition.
Mhm.
It is actually looking Israel's long-term future in the region in a way that it can no longer feel insecure, so its security can flow across the region and we can move into a new Middle East. Instead of the language of the Middle East being a bully where we use our force everywhere, and that's what Israel's been doing, we move into a cooperative model where we can figure out how we can move maximalists aside and work out how we can be a prosperous region. That's the aim. That's what we are trying to do. The problem is, post-October 7th, many in Israel said we have to be maximalists if we're going to survive in this region, because this is what happens when we're not. And like, we're trying to get rid of this ring of fire around us. And the actual desire to get rid of the ring of fire is a shared goal, also of Riyadh, also of the UAE, because they don't want Israel to feel insecure. They understand it's a very powerful nation, but the methodology that Israel has adopted since October 7th
Right.
with the rest of the region. Like, it's great what you did to Hezbollah, but now you need to enact LAF. So, okay, trust and verify. Same with Syria. You might not like al-Shah, and you don't want jihadists on your border. Okay, how can we do this without trying to collapse the government? And that's why point 16, as weird as it looks, is modeling after Lebanon. Fine. Okay, we can try and work that out. But by the way, guys, at the end, there has to be a Palestinian state. There has to be this. And yes, we know, and good, it's a defeat for Hamas. We are all agreeing Hamas can't survive after what they did on October 7th. Okay, but you can't use that to foreclose the political horizon of Palestinians. And if you want to, you're causing this conflict to spread across the region, and we're not willing to do that. The Israelis haven't caught up to that yet. But that's what the French-Saudi initiative was. What it needed was a Trump like lens or a Trump like translation for the Israelis. And this is perfect. This isn't 67 lines. This isn't international law. This isn't that. The last 3 points of the plan are a Trump version of that has been attached on to make sure that people understand this is a way out of the like malaise that we're in. Are we going to get there? No idea. Is it, fanciful thinking? Maybe. Is Tony Blair potentially, from just a pure like thing, being a governor of an Arab region, seemingly absurd? Probably. But with a Trump administration that has limited capacity, having an individual who has an ability to walk into the prime minister's office, to walk into the crown prince's office, to walk into the Oval Office is not a bad thing. Now,
Correct.
It's not for me to accept. It's for the people of the region to accept it. I'm not forcing it on anyone. But again, if the aim is to make the peace process relevant, really relevant once again, this is the best way of doing it.
That was brilliant. And I like your framing of Israel needing a Trump translation of that, really.
Laura, you have anything else you want to close us out with?
No, I mean, I would just say, because I've tried to watch Witkoff on the Iran file and also on this file, and he's also sometimes doing Russia-Ukraine, and he seems, we saw several issues get out of hand, and who can blame, I don't blame him for that, but it is interesting that when Jared Kushner got involved, because he seems like he's able to maybe get his father-in-law's attention on the no West Bank annexation. I mean, sometimes it just feels like Trump, he's not totally, anyhow, it was interesting to see how they were able to get Trump's attention on the Arabs' concern, other people's concern that Israel might annex the West Bank. So anyhow, that was very interesting.
All right. Well, with that, we are at time. Laura, thank you very much for being with us. Joel, thank you very much for being with us. And everyone else who joined us again on short notice and right before Chag, I appreciate it. Lots more to come on this. I know we are all hoping for the best, hoping for the most optimistic read of all of these things. And, as we go into the holiday, we will take that with us. So thank you all, and we'll see you another time. Bye.
Thank you.